So if everybody could take their seats, we're going to begin the next block of speakers. So the good news is, before I make the next introduction, we did get the heat on. We had heard from some of you all that it was a little chilly. So continuous improvement, right? I mean, you know, you tell us a problem, we solve it. So we got some heat on. If it gets too hot, let us know, but hopefully it'll stay. This is kind of abnormal Savannah weather. So the next speakers are Jay and Katherine Wolf from Atlanta. And let me tell you, my wife and I traveled to Cabo to go to a similar leadership conference, and we got in a van, and my wife sat next to Catherine Jay's up front, and we began having this amazing conversation. And we're racing down the roads trying to go to the resort, and the van all of a sudden goes thump, 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 and the rear tire blew out. And we're sitting on the side of the road in Mexico. It's hot. Jay and Katherine are as cool as cucumbers. And we have this wonderful conversation. The resort responds really quick, which was great. We had another van. We loaded everybody's stuff. We loaded the wheelchair. We get to the resort. They give an extraordinary talk. And after the talk was over, we all go out and have a little refreshments and relaxation, and they're swimming in the pool. And I swim up to Jay and Katherine, and we start talking, and I said, you know, that was one of the most amazing talks I'd ever seen. And I said, we're working on this leadership conference in Savannah, and I would love to have your story told from our stage. And they said, we're on it. So last night at 10:15, they flew in from San Jose, California to be with us. So I'm going to toss it over to their intro video, and then they're going to come up and tell their extraordinary story. Jay and Katherine Wolf.
Hi. Hi.
Good
Hey
morning.
there. Good morning. We're so excited to be with you. And as Charles said, we got into Savannah and got settled at the hotel about 11 last night. We were speaking at a marriage conference in California, and it was a priority to be here. We normally would have said too much for one weekend, but we had to be here for this moment. So thank you for having us.
Yeah, and we're so grateful. Humbled. Thank you, Charles. And I'm Jay, and this is Katherine. If you didn't recognize us from the video, and my dance skills, I appreciate that. That little applause and the laughter. But we're humbled to come back to this beautiful city. Katherine and I are from the Southeast, but we moved to LA. We'll share some of our story in a minute. California for adventure. And just moved back to the Atlanta area about 3.5 years ago. But we're so encouraged to see what the South is becoming. And we're honored just to sort of cheer that on in our own way and to receive and to learn, to lament, to just champion with excitement what is happening, what is being reborn, even in this place. So thank you for the work you're doing in this community and in this region. And we're so hopeful. I mean, that's part of our sort of our message, is that hope heals the deepest wounds that we all carry, which there are many, obviously, because we're human. And even in the story of the Southeast, there are many deep wounds. But we know that this transcendent hope of a story bigger than ourselves, that we live not in isolation but together, is the hope that is going to heal us. And so today we are going to be a little bit of a different mix. I appreciate the programming inspiration to throw a story in the mix. I do believe that our brains work differently when we hear a story, right? You know, you can take a 1, 2, 3 points. It's amazing. But something about the left side of the brain, the analytical, and the right side creative, come together neurobiologically when we hear a story. And so today we hope to maybe put a little flesh and bones on some of the things that are sparking maybe in your head and your heart during this time. But yeah, Katherine and I, again, are just humbled to get to sort of cheer you guys on in this moment.
So right about now, you're probably freaking out that, wait, I thought this was supposed to be a leadership conference and inspire me, and there's a girl in a wheelchair on the stage and a couple who's clearly having a hard time. And maybe you're like the sweet church lady in the back who's, sweet Southerner, whispering like, bless her heart. That sweet little thing, she must be having such a hard time. Oh my goodness, that husband, goodness, they must just be suffering. And that's the end of the story. Well, definitely not the case. And I should tell you that I hope by the end of our time together, you will not feel worse about your life or bummed out by this story or made sad. However, we have about zero desire to inspire you, actually. It's interesting. That's not really something I care about, is providing inspiration based on what happened to me. I think being used and honestly exploited, as many in the disability community are, as inspirational, is not a desire we have. It's something very different that we really feel like God has given us to share from a wheelchair, actually, which is this. So I even very short, well, I should say this first, actually. As you saw in the video, we believe so deeply that we all have invisible wheelchairs. You know, I'm the one in this outer wheelchair. However, everybody's got them. I doubt many of you have had a massive brainstem stroke and very nearly died and become severely disabled afterwards. Anybody? Maybe, but I've never had anyone raise their hand. And yet, I imagine you've been through some stuff. Has anybody had a perfect life with no pain or issues or problems of any kind whatsoever? Of course not. Everyone's had bad stuff. Everybody has hard suffering and stuff that is not right in the story and internal pain of all different kinds. And maybe if somebody saw you at the grocery store, they would know what all's going on. With me, something's a little more obvious here. However, they don't see what all's going on in here, where there's a lot of issues still, a lot of pain, a lot of hard relational, emotional, spiritual, financial, all the stuff that's churning inside of us always. And here's what's cool. A moment of hope. So after my stroke, and you'll hear details in a minute, but everybody always said she's wheelchair bound, like Katherine is wheelchair bound today. And it never settled well. I don't know, I just didn't like that phraseology, and I did not feel suddenly bound by a wheelchair. It was so strange. And I realized it's because I'm not. I'm not wheelchair bound. I'm actually wheelchair free because the wheelchair is my avenue to go where I want to go, to be in the rooms I want to be in. The wheelchair is actually what gets me to show up for my life. So here's what's cool. Stay with me and wake up in the back. Get some more coffee if you need it. This is important. So if I can see, remember how I said we all have invisible wheelchairs, I believe. So if perhaps I can see my wheelchair is in fact an agent of my freedom, could it possibly be true for us all? It's interesting to consider. I'm not saying that's always the case, not remotely. But is there a universe where we can consider that wheelchairs of all kinds are in fact enabling flourishing within the constraints of our story and our past? I think it stands to reason if we get creative, that could be the case. Speaking of this, wheelchairs and all, I want to show y'all I can technically walk a little bit and stand, as you see. It's not great, and I'm going to stop scaring Jay Wolf, but I can.
Yeah, let's sit down.
But here's the reason I'm doing this. Too many of us folks assume that because we know one story of disability, we know every story. And that's not the case. You see, we call it having curiosity without assumption. And I present to you leaders, we need to start doing that to the disability community. If you know one person, that's their specific story of disability. I can stand and kind of hobble around a little. It's not technically walking, but I'll take it, and I can do it. And it's just so important that we are able to be curious without assumption. And of course, I cannot help but think that must be a very important principle in leadership, is to show curiosity without assumption. I'll sit down safely now and stop talking.
There we go. You did great. I know the Morrises are a little, they're looking.
Right,
cheering for
I'm
you.
scared.
This new venue, we don't need to slip and fall.
No,
straight out of the gate.
don't be scared.
It's beautiful, by the way. Yeah, and so we're going to jump into our story. But again, as Katherine said, we're not trying to bum you out or inspire you. We're trying to give you a vision of hope, of our own constraints being avenues for creativity, for avenues of flourishing, which again is very counter to, I think, what our culture tells us about any limitations on our life. It's very counter to even what maybe our own heads and our hearts long for. We want access to everything. But even in this digital age, we realize when we get everything that we thought we wanted, it may not be exactly what we thought we were getting, right? And so when we have access to everything, sometimes we're way more limited than we thought. And can we lean into the limitations of our story, of our assignment, maybe even of our disabilities, of our struggle, and find in and through them, not just in spite of them, but in and through them, there's this avenue to a different kind of flourishing. So Katherine, as I said, and I moved back to Atlanta, but we're from the South originally. We went to school in Birmingham, Alabama, at a place called Sanford. And this weekend when we were in the Silicon Valley, I had to confess that when we were growing up, we often, when we moved out of after Sanford to California, people thought we went to Stanford, and we sort of just let them think that usually. They hadn't heard of Sanford in Birmingham. And as you can tell, we give off pretty big Stanford, what is it?
Academic, for sure.
Mathematical, I don't know what they even do there, but something very specific. Anyway, we went to Sanford in Birmingham, and shortly after we graduated, we decided to get married, and married in the fall of 2004, and started this journey. We didn't really even know what we were going to do, but we were going to go to California, pursue our dreams. We just felt really led to have an adventure together. And my dad is a pastor and sort of sent us off on our way with a little marriage sermon that was a little bit interesting. He out of the book of Matthew in the Bible, preached this sermon that the storms of life are coming, and it really matters what you found your life on.
I'm like, thanks.
And we were like, Dad,
Cool.
That is the most depressing wedding sermon you could tell a 22-year-old. What are you thinking? The love chapter, of course, is going to be a better option. And yet in his wisdom, he wanted even us as 22-year-olds, who thought just the world is our oyster, we're going to go to California and have this adventure. He wanted us to be thinking deeply that it matters right now what you found your life on, because the storms will come inevitably. And none of us want to think the storms are coming, but actually 3 years after this picture was taken on our wedding day, the great storm of our life would come. But we jumped in to sort of all life had to offer as, people who are 22 and are kind of dumb and naive to the reality of the world. But hey, we're going to go have this beautiful adventure, and we did. And I went to Pepperdine Law School. Katherine had been in the entertainment industry in the South and had got an agent in Los Angeles, and so wanted to try her hand in the big city.
Yeah, and just so you know, I was a really big model in Los Angeles. You've probably heard of me, like Giselle, Katherine. I mean, I was huge. I made Georgia proud. We brought a picture of the pinnacle of my work as a model for you today. Here I am at the Tiki Hut in Disneyland, modeling the 25th anniversary Tiki Hut Moo Moo collection. So, as you can see, I had arrived. I had made my parents proud as a Tiki Hut Moo Moo model.
Well done, well done. And your dad paid Stanford tuition to do, anyway, I'm just kidding, Stanford. And also, that is not me. I just need to say, I would not wear that hideous of a shirt. But that is a stranger holding my wife's hand, so that's a little awkward. But anyway, there are many highs and lows of that early season of marriage, and yet we did, again, have that idea and that question of what are we going to found our life on. And so we plugged in deeply into that community. We didn't know anybody. We had no family, but we did what we as firstborn kids knew to do, which was just to give ourselves fully to the season we were in. And so we plugged into our local church and to the law school community and even the entertainment community, and just sort of made our life in LA. You know, so often people come to places like that sort of as a means to an end to get their dreams. And obviously those don't usually happen, and then they leave kind of disenchanted. But for us, we had this advice that, you know, this is one of the great cities and states and experiences in life. So just jump in and become students of that place. And that's what we did. And so fast forward a few years, we'd made our life in Los Angeles. And, you know, occasionally this happens, though I don't recommend it in grad school, but we had a baby. And it was not on our 5-year plan, but it was perfectly, I think, planned, because James Thompson Wolf, who was born in the fall of 2007, would be with us about 6 months. And then right after that, we would face this great storm in April of 2008.
That's right. So 6 months and 5 days after that little baby was born, I would wake up and feel funny, but not think anything of it, because of course I've just had a baby, so I'm feeling funky anyway. I'm breastfeeding, I'm not sleeping, so I have no reason to think anything is wrong. I have no medical history, no family history, no symptoms, nothing. And as we go throughout the day, I end up, after he's come home in a 45-minute window, which we feel like is miraculous, he's home, I put the baby down for a nap, and I'm going into the kitchen, and I fall to my hands and knees, and they go numb, and I start throwing up. And he's able to call the paramedics, who come and determine something is very wrong with her. And they put me on the stretcher, and I lose consciousness as we're leaving the married housing apartment we're living in. And I can remember my thoughts being like, oh, we should grab a toothbrush in case I have to spend the night there. And I wonder if this is that funny burrito I ate yesterday. And very like surface thoughts of what was happening. And as we leave the married housing apartment, I go totally unconscious. And I only wake up from that moment 2.5 months later.
So that day was April 21st, 2008, and maybe as we're telling this part of our story, you're reminded of a day in your life when everything changed, and you got a diagnosis, or you lost somebody that was important to you, or got news that changed everything, and sort of this line of demarcation was run straight through your story that you could never go back to the way it was before. And for us, out of the blue, again, as Katherine said, no symptoms, no warning, no family history, just an ordinary day with a new season ahead of us. I was about to graduate in 3 weeks. We had a new baby. We were moving into what seemed so obviously our next step and what was going to be ours in our story. And then in a moment, it was upended and everything was hanging by a thread. And this is the world we live in. It's not safe. We live out stories we never could have imagined living. And so I raced with our baby behind the ambulance down the Pacific Coast Highway, and didn't even know where they were taking her, but they took her to UCLA, and I knew that was a college, but I didn't know they had a hospital. And I remember just coming around the bend, seeing this massive billboard that said UCLA Medical Center, best hospital on the West, and the number 3 hospital in the country. And again, in the midst of that chaos, it just felt like somehow there was a path being laid before us. There was an order being made out of it. And I went into the ER waiting room, and it was a Monday afternoon, and I was super confused because I saw these familiar faces waiting there, and I realized it was our community. It was our church friends, and it was our Pepperdine Law School family who would come to give us, I think, the gift that we maybe overlook as humans, one of the deepest gifts we get to give each other, which is the ministry of our presence. When the world is upended, we get to show up with our presence and with our tears even. And our community taught us that. So often I think we as leaders and competent people, we want to make sense of it out of the gate. We want to put some platitudes around it to sort of soften the blow or fix it. And yet none of that was helpful. Maybe you've received some of those well-meaning words in the moment. What you really need to know is that you're not alone when the world has let you down deeply and when the rug has been pulled up from under you. And so that's what our community did with us and taught us in that season. And they came around me, and we met with the neurosurgeon who was on call that day named Dr. Nestor Gonzalez, and he just happened to be on call, double board certified, in these sort of very specific arenas that would be just perfect for Catherine's situation. And yet he said, I need you to know your wife is suffering a massive brainstem stroke due to a very rare condition she's had her whole life, but she never knew until this moment, called an AVM. And he said, unfortunately, it is the largest I've ever seen. It's covering over half of her cerebellum and wrapping around her brainstem. There's 4 aneurysms on top of it. And the bleeding is actually herniating her full brain into her spinal column, which is not survivable. So I need you to understand the prognosis. And again, this, in a matter of hours, just going from an ordinary day in the life to this was nothing short of head spinning for me. And yet the fact that I was a lawyer was not actually helpful in deciding whether he could take the case, but he did decide to take it, thankfully, and give this mom a second chance. And so we took her into surgery that would be about 8 hours, and our community gathered and just sort of sat vigil, and yet shared this most powerful experience of humanity, of longing for life, but also understanding that death is right in front of us all, of celebrating, of crying, of laughing together, and even reading from the Bible, some scripture that had meant a lot to us, but knowing that we'd have to believe it in a different way. That if God was working all things for good, it didn't feel very good, And, in that moment, we realized that this was a different season that we were going to be stepping into, where we were going to have to bet, really, Catherine's life on some of those ideas and promises. And that next morning, early, the surgeon came out and looked exhausted, and he said he hadn't even looked at the clock the entire time, and it had been 16 straight hours of micro brain surgery in order to save her life. And he said 2 words that we celebrate to this day on April 22nd, which is the day following the stroke. He said, "Katherine lived." And it's sort of like our Easter Sunday to the Good Friday, but we're celebrating 14 years of Katherine lived, second chance birthday coming up this spring. So thank you.
Thank you.
Against all odds. But we really believe that even just that smallest glimmer of life is the beginning of hope. And when we find that life, we have to lean into it, we have to uplift it, we have to nurture it. And so they did take her to the ICU, and the doctor was going to go rest, and he said, you need to be prepared for her to go be in a medically induced coma for about 4 days, just to have her body heal a bit. And later that night, the ICU nurse paged him, and he ran back up thinking that Katherine had died. And the nurse excitedly said, "No, you won't believe it, but she's trying to communicate, and she's supposed to be in a coma." And as you can tell, they don't make medically induced comas that are going to keep this woman from communicating. She had, she needed to tell us she was still in there. And but truly, they thought she could have been paralyzed. She could have been vegetative. They had removed half of her cerebellum and sacrificed in her cranial nerves. That really it would be hard to come back from. And so for her, right out of the gate, to sort of be responding, wiggling her fingers and toes, she wasn't paralyzed, she wasn't brain dead. It was the first of many, many miracles. And then Katherine would be on life support, though, for 40 days, and just learning to sort of breathe again on her own. And again, we received the details of that story, that it wasn't 39 or 41, but sort of this number 40, just being a real symbol in our story of there being made a way through the wilderness. We weren't quite to the promised land yet, but those details of the story gave us hope to keep persevering through it.
That's right. So just to review what he said, I had what's called an AVM, arterial venous malformation. It's a super rare condition that you're born with. It's mine formed in my mother's womb. It's a collection of blood vessels that you're born with that grows and grows and is not formed correctly. So it's kind of like a brain aneurysm, but way worse. And mine grew and grew and grew and then ruptured as a 26-year-old, and it caused the brainstem stroke. So I always thought, for years after the stroke, that the reason I'm so impaired today is because I'm a stroke survivor. Wouldn't you think that? Oh, she's a stroke survivor. That's why she's so disabled. That's why her hand doesn't work. Her face is paralyzed. She can't walk. She's deaf in one ear. Excuse me. Nearly blind in one eye. All these issues are because I survived a stroke. But that actually is not the case. It's really powerful, I think, for you leaders to remember this word picture, that I'm actually not deeply impaired and subsequently disabled because I had a stroke. I'm actually so impaired because the surgeon made the decision, the very informed and careful decision, in fact, to wound me very greatly, to make sacrifices so that I could live, so that I would be here. And I can't help but think that is such a powerful takeaway in all of our lives. Is could things be sacrificed? Could things be very changed? And we thought they would look like, but so that something else could flourish. Once again, I think it's worth considering that powerful truth. And for me, I really wish I would have had that perspective right after the stroke, and I definitely didn't. It would take many, many years, in fact. I was in ICU for 40 days, like he said, and then in acute rehab for another 2.5 months. And then I transitioned to 1.5 years in a residential rehab. And in that residential rehab, I would slowly start to relearn to regain function. And it was all pretty horrible, to be honest. I mean, like your worst nightmare, your body doesn't work anymore. You can't eat food. You're eating through a tube in your stomach, and you can't walk, and you can't see, and it was just awful. And as bad and painful as it was for me, by far the worst pain of it all was watching my baby grow without mama being able to take care of him. Essentially, James was 2.5 months older when I woke up, and even then, for another almost 3 years, 2.5-ish years, I was not able to be his, primary caregiver. And that picture you're seeing is my first Mother's Day. And I have such a complicated relationship with that photo. I'm so glad we have it in some ways. But I have no memory of that day. And that's very sad. And that will be very sad my whole life. Everybody in our world wants to tell you it's all going to be okay one day, it'll get better. And in some ways, it absolutely has. And in some ways, those memories are haunting and sad, and that will be lifelong. I think the sorrow of not being able to take care of my baby will last my whole life. And I don't necessarily think that there's anything wrong with saying that out loud, that we carry a low-grade sorrow and sadness in many of our stories, and they can still be beautiful, redemptive stories. And that doesn't mean they're without pain and suffering and sadness in them. And that's for sure one for me. And yet I continued to get better and better and better, and slowly started to relearn to hobble around, as you saw. And I did finally relearn to eat food after 11 months and 5 days, and it was awful. Not eating food is just puts you in this weird, isolated world, and it was terrible. And I couldn't speak yet. This is a new voice today. I didn't have this voice before my stroke. If you heard a recording, it would sound totally different. And I hadn't learned to use this new sound. I'm missing a vocal cord, actually. And on and on and on. It was like this new body. And everyone asked if I had a moment of just saying, I cannot live this life. I cannot have my world turned upside down and go with it. And I really feel like God made a mistake here. Like I don't fit in this world. I can't live this way. And in those very worst moments, which was, 6-8 months after the stroke, when I kind of woke up really to what was happening, what I was facing, I feel like I came to understand on a very deep level, and this really transformed my life and kept me on earth quite probably. I understood this truth, that there are no mistakes, that God did not make a mistake here, that this was what my life was supposed to be, and that I could live into this reality, this assignment for my life, and live well in it, no matter the limitations, no matter the constraints of the story, that somehow there's no replacing me on earth. Jay could never marry a woman as amazing as I am. And thanks. And James could never have another mother, even if I'm deeply disabled now. And on and on and on, that these people need me. And if I was not supposed to be here, I would not be here. That I would have died, but I didn't die. And I believe if you have a pulse, you have a purpose. And obviously, I have a pulse. And I think even in those early days, I caught a glimpse of this pulse that you have demands that you live with tremendous purpose into the story. And I think that really changed my brain.
Yeah. Well, and even when you had that sort of epiphany of purpose in this new kind of story, you know, sometimes when we go through pain and we kind of get this glimpse, we think we've kind of made a bargain that we're never going to have to go through pain again, you know? And so Katherine wouldn't learn to eat or walk or do all those things again for another almost year and a half. And so then there's this evolving sort of question of redefining everything. We finally, after about 2 years after that stroke, got back to our community, and it looked really different, you know, than we thought. But we began this process of redefining everything. If we were going to stay on this earth in this new story, we were going to have to probably redefine how we thought some of those terms were going to play out, right? And I think so many of us, that's the critical work. We cannot change the story we're living, but we can change the story that we tell ourselves about ourselves. We can't sort of will, you know, some new ending necessarily or change what's happened in the past, but we get to own the story that we tell ourselves about what's happened, the lessons that we receive most deeply. And so that's been the work of the past couple of years in our life. And the reality is, you know, it would be easy to say, hey, we went through all this hard stuff. Now we get to be on these stages and tell these, you know, stories of sort of the overcoming, right? We're celebrating the outcome. But the reality is, I think back to 2 years after probably this photo was taken, a couple years after we had kind of come back to normal, and we had the annual visit with the doctor who had done Katherine's surgery, Dr. Nestor Gonzalez, and he came into the waiting room. She had gotten her scans done again. Again, this is about 3 years after the stroke. And he came into the waiting area, and he was crying, which isn't great, you know, when your doctor's crying before he tells you some news about your health. And, you know, this man had become a dear friend to us. And he just said, I don't know how to tell you this, but you have another aneurysm in your brain, totally unrelated. It's on your good side, unfortunately, too, behind your eye. And, you know, in that moment, we just sort of felt kicked in the gut. We're sort of ascending. We feel like on this trajectory, we've been through the worst. We're going to check the suffering off the bucket list, then go now to the vacations and the Cabo, Charles, which thankfully it's both and sometimes. We sort of made this deal in our life. It felt like, you know, to God, like we've been through enough. We feel like we're entitled to something good and better. And we feel like what we've been presented with is this opportunity to redefine what good even means. What is the good life? And is it really a good, hard life? Sort of a one word, where it's not mutually exclusive. And we've been wrestling with that. And Katherine continues again to, you know, we have just unexpected twists and turns. So we're in this moment telling you all these things that we know are true, not because it happened once, but because it continues to evolve, and the depth of the reality of this experience continues.
Right. As of today, I've had 13 surgeries since the stroke. I've severely broken my right leg, fell in a bathtub and broke a set of ribs. Most recently, in 2020, appropriately, I tore my ACL, MCL, and meniscus very badly and had to have surgery to replace it. And I've had untold just medical suffering and emotional suffering post-stroke. So we shared this all because it would be really cool to share, like, they overcame and life got awesome. They had a car wreck and now here we are, and we get to inspire you with how awesome it is on the other side. But I feel so called to say it's also hard and not easy on the other side. And can you persevere in the not easy? Because we're all living on different versions of that. That, we didn't just come out and live to tell and now it's all easy. It's hard. And yet we believe there is such good and hard and good, and those coexist so beautifully.
I think so often, too, we miss the miracle right in front of us, longing for the miracle we thought we were going to get, right? And so I think it's a miracle that we're here right now. It's a miracle we're on the stage in this moment. It's a miracle. You're here right now.
That's right.
And so we want to reorient every day back to the reality this is a miracle. And what are we going to do with this life that we've been given? Not the life we thought we should have received, not the life we think we're entitled to because we've been through so much, but the life right in front of us. Mm-hmm. And I think so much of that work has, for us, been about going back to those places of our wounding. And probably when you've been hurt, the last place you want to go is the place that hurt you, right? You want to go anywhere but that place. You want to move forward into places of healing and hope and newness and goodness and not reminders of the pain and the trauma. And yet we felt deeply called in a way we knew that it was really a calling because we really didn't want to go back to it, back to the communities of stroke survivors and their families, back to the communities of people with disabilities, people in medical trauma. And truly for us, it was like, look, she'll be the miracle girl, but just not from a wheelchair, surely. She's going to get out of that. One day she's going to do enough PT and recovery, and it'll be like this never happened. And the reality is that we believe that the scars on her body, literally and internally in us all, are really the best part because they mean we lived. Yeah. They mean we survived. And so what do we do with those scars? But we let them bear witness to ourselves and to others that the wound is not the end of the story. Mm-hmm. And so when we sort of, again, unwillingly went back to the community of people with disabilities and said, you know what, I think we have a guidebook to offer you in our life, and it's still being written. Yeah. But we think it's something that will maybe help you understand that this is not the end of your suffering and your story, that there is a new story ahead of you if you'll step into it. And we'll do it with you. And you're going to come out of this pit with us because somebody else helped drag us out as well. And so that's been the work of our life that's been so redemptive to know that we find healing, not just our own healing when we return to those places of our wounding, but there is this sort of overflow halo effect of healing to other people who are in that spot too. So to go back to those places and be able to tell somebody who was in that place what you wish somebody told you when you were there, that is the work we all get to step into with our pain. And so for us, that looked like creating this community, this camp community called Hope Heals Camp for families with disabilities, just like us. And this is going to be our 6th year. We're expanding by 50% this year. It never in our wildest dreams. We're much more. I know we have Mr. Horst coming in a little bit. We like the Ritz-Carlton a little bit better than the Great Outdoors, because wheelchairs and whatever. It's we never thought in our wildest imaginations we would be leading a camp for families with disabilities. But there's something about camp. There's something about communing with nature together that just helps you see your life differently. And so we created this space that has changed our life, this sacred gathering of people who aren't showing up with any facades. We're just showing up saying it is incredible that we made it to this moment we shouldn't have against all odds. And so we just in this sort of hope it forward kind of work, we call it, this has been the work we never really sought, and in some ways we pushed against, and yet it's been the work that's changed everything for us.
Our camp has been this crazy place of freedom, which is so funny to say because it's a bunch of people who got real problems getting around in the world, doing life, being free. And yet there's this crazy freedom. And I have a theory as to why it's happened this way. Look at that picture. That was a man who has an amputated leg and a little boy who has both legs amputated. And they didn't know each other. The one on the left is from Illinois, and the one on the right is from North Carolina, and they got to feel less alone, and that's powerful. But the big takeaway for y'all of this camp, for our lives and for you leaders' lives, is that the baseline is so different that when you gather this group of people from all over the country with all these broken stories and wheelchairs and amputees and spina bifida and all kinds of personality and behavioral disabilities and just everything, and you throw them in the deep end together, it's crazy. There's this bizarre freedom because nobody cares about things that don't matter. Nobody's asking, where is your sweet 18-year-old headed for college? Will it be an Ivy League institution? It's, do you think your 18-year-old will live to his 19th birthday since he's terminal? And it's just like a reset of reality that there's such brokenness, but we all get to corporately disrupt the deep lie that we tell each other that joy can't come without it being pain-free and the best it's ever been. That joy can only happen when things are perfect. And us people know that's not the case. That the dream is shot. We're never going to be whatever we thought we were going to be, do whatever we thought we were going to do. But can we live well right here in this story? Can we love this story? Can we recognize that in this story is the people that I love most in the world? In this story is some incredibly amazing stuff. And maybe it's not the story I thought I'd have when I was a little girl. But I imagine most people in this room are not living the life they thought they would when they were a little boy or little girl, because that's life. And these people see that. We know that. And we get to be about championing that there is joy and pain in the same story.
The last little sort of reminder, sort of visual that we want to leave with you at the end of our story is what we think we all long for, which is in places where it looks like there should only be death or an ending, that new life might come.
Yeah, it's miraculous for sure, because not many ladies in wheelchairs have babies, but I was able to have a second son, John Nestor, born in June of 2015.
Sorry.
And, oh, sorry. There we are. And little baby John is 6 years old today and doing well. And that older one, there he is 14, almost taller than his mom, as you can see. And that little one, John, is just this crazy miracle. His name, John, first name is John from the Bible, my favorite John. Favorite verse is John 9:3, that someone asked Jesus why the man was born blind. And Jesus says, so that the works of God might be displayed through his life. And his middle name, Nestor, is for my neurosurgeon, Nestor Gonzalez, whose life's work has been giving second chances to patients just like his mommy. So, of course, our prayer is that John Nestor gets to share his story with his name and gets to speak into the hopelessness and brokenness so many of us feel. We did not know this at the time, but Nestor, my neurosurgeon's name that we named our son, Nestor, in Hebrew means seeker of miracles. So we literally named our child the seeker of miracles, Wolf. We feel like that's a good name and a good story for a kid. And to speak to the gentleman who spoke before us, whose mother became quadriplegic, I happen to believe, based on any person I have ever known who has a parent that becomes disabled or is born disabled, that they are the most incredible people on earth. They have a different compassion, empathy, kindness. It's really powerful. It's no wonder that you are leading so well at your institution, because you're an incredible person who has seen the value of suffering young and how it can inform your life.
And we'll leave you with this idea that we tell our kids every night, and in so doing, we really tell ourselves too. But we tell them, no matter what tomorrow brings, it might be the best day, It might be the worst day. It might be the last day of our lives. And yet we want to live it well with courage because we believe that God has equipped us with everything we need for the hard road ahead, but we know that it's a good road too.
Yeah.
We know that it's a good story. So we believe that God made you and us to live out the hard parts of the good story he's writing in your life. And we want to keep persevering with you. Keep up the great work, everybody. Thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. God bless y'all. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Jay and Katherine, thank you. We have time for a question or two. Yes, ma'am. Let's get a microphone. There's a microphone back there.
Okay.
Loudly. Okay, no mic? Can everyone hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
I know you might have come not to inspire, but oh my God. You have inspired in ways that you have no idea.
Oh, I love that.
I'm actually a survivor of leukemia.
Oh.
And, you know, the thought of going past that and, you know, that was the bad part. You have changed my mind about redefining
Yes.
the narrative.
That's it.
And I wrote a book, but yet I don't promote it, I don't talk about it. It's just that thought.
Yeah.
And you have just enlightened me and put a fire in me to speak more about the life now. Thank you for being here, and thank you for inspiring that dark part that you try to push back to live. To live is to live in that truth. So thank you.
Thank you.
Wow. So glad you're here.
That
Thank
wasn't a
you.
question, but I'll take it.
Love it. Thank you.
Thank you for telling your story. Really appreciate it. Have you had the opportunity to interface with people at Shepherd Center who are at the very beginning of their journey?
Oh my goodness, yes, including a wonderful woman from Savannah you may know. Caroline Moore was her unmarried name. Now she's Caroline Broadman, and she became a quadriplegic several years ago. But yes, to answer the question, absolutely. And, you know, I treat it with such care because in that very early season, it is not very hopeful to see a woman in a wheelchair with a paralyzed face pull up to your bedside and say, it's all going to be fine. I mean, it's not encouraging yet. It will be one day, but today's not that day. Now is the time to sort of like stay in the back, maybe give them our book and tell them like, read this when you want to. But yes, for sure, the main thing that I get to do a lot with families at Shepherd is encourage the parents. Many, many times there was younger people who ended up at Shepherd from accidents of all kinds. And I get to speak to the parents and comfort their broken hearts. And really what Jay and I both get to do is show them a family that's living with disabilities and that life goes on and that suffering is not the end of the story.
And Shepherd's is an incredible. I mean, we were in California, and Shepherd's was one of the shortlist options of where to go for brain rehab. It's that high level, and so I think it's a good reminder, just in terms of our community. You know, now that we're in Atlanta, that Shepherd was on our radar, and we really targeted to
Georgia,
say,
woohoo!
What I'm saying is, no matter what, again, that story of wounding, going back to that place, like, it's tough to go back to Shepherd Center to just remember.
Yeah.
Probably the darkest season of our life, but we know that we can bring a unique light to that place. And I think for all of us, like, what are the places right in front of you in this area, in this region, that maybe aren't the places you want to go back to, but you know you need to because you have something to offer to the folks who are there.
It is so true. I almost have to take like a really deep breath, like give myself a little pep talk, like I'm going to go back in, and it's going to be so hard and so sad. But I am called to this place and these people, and I'm going to jump in because I am these people. And that deep mindset of I'm going to look somebody in the eye, that's where I was, and say, you're coming out too, you're coming with me, is what we all get to do with our lives. And just as the last speaker said, I forget that gentleman's name, he was amazing, like that's the energy that fuels the soul. So when we get to tell people they're not alone in their pain and that gift, I was also like your mother, the lady when the nurses and doctors are doing just horrible things to me, comforting them and checking on them like, oh, you got to put an IV in me? Let me make your day better, lady. And I have no idea why I did that, but I'm so glad I did because it changed how my brain thought about my situation.
I saw you when we were, I'm right here. I saw you when we were coming off the elevator and hold it together. But thank you. I stand behind what the other lady said was you are inspiration, because there are times, even in my strength, that I have to remind myself that I am been built for this. And I am an amputee and a 2-time breast cancer survivor. After 22 years, my breast cancer came back, and I've been an amputee since 2006. And I have pushed myself to be the best that I knew how to be. But thank you today, because you told me that the reason why I do it is because I was built for this.
You were. You absolutely were.
We're so glad you're here. And keep going. Keep going. We need,
Absolutely.
you know, I think the reality with the disabled community too is like it's 20% of the population. It's the largest minority group in the world, but nobody would really think that, even business owners, church, you know, like we don't have any.
Wait, side note, we love that
Yeah,
you
thanks for
have
the
a
ramp. That's
ramp,
awesome.
an elevator down here, like many people are not tracking
Yeah.
what the disabled community needs. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
And even in the Southeast, there's a higher percentage as well. And yet we sort of think, oh, I don't see anybody with disabilities, and that's because
They're
there's
not there.
There's no place for them
They
where you
stayed
are.
home.
And I think, can we be people that make a seat at the table for everybody?
Yeah.
And what does that look like? And with
Yeah.
humility and with curiosity, without assumption, to say, hey, like, how can we make a place here for you? Because it's not just out of pity, but we're missing something if we don't have your voice at this table.
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you for making all the efforts to be here today. I know
Absolutely.
it's not easy.
You have a
Yeah.
seat at this table.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Jay and Catherine. Really appreciate you all being here.
Oh, what a blessing, Charles. Thank y'all. Thank y'all so much for having us. We're glad to be here. God bless you. God bless y'all. Oh, so sweet.